6 months ago, The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered was shadow dropped to an audience who had been dissecting every piece of information that they could to calculate its arrival. The Oblivion Remaster promised to bring a classic back to modern audiences, and I was all in, day one. However, while it felt great to be finally diving back into this supposedly enhanced version of Cyrodiil, something just felt different. I attributed it to perhaps my own bias of looking at the game through the lens of a younger me. But I've come to realize after 6 months of playing and living with the new Oblivion that it is more than that. And it left me asking myself, was Oblivion Remastered actually worth it? The original Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion released in a different era and absolutely changed the game. It was one of the first major RPGs to make the jump to HD consoles. It had voice acting for every NPC, a dynamic world where NPCs had schedules and routines, and you may not believe it looking back now, but the graphics at the time were extraordinary. I personally remember looking at the water after leaving the Imperial prison for the first time and thinking that I was truly on an epic adventure. This was at a time when quest markers were seen as a massive innovation, but even then, Oblivion wasn't perfect. It still had that Bethesda level of charm with buggy physics and wonky NPCs, but it was still pushing boundaries. It was ambitious in ways that made sense for 2006. It went on to win Game of the Year from multiple outlets, and for many, is still the best Elder Scrolls game ever made. Yes, I'm talking to you, all 4 versions of Skyrim. Fast forward to 2025, and the main factor driving the anticipation for Oblivion Remastered was nostalgia, which seems to not only be the case in games, but in almost anything today. People just want to remember the good old days, and for me personally, The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered was one of my most anticipated games, and probably the most excited I had been for a game's release in quite some time. The live stream event showcasing the game and eventually finalizing it with a shadow drop gave me a sort of nostalgic excitement, like I was recapturing my childhood. While there was some speculation that it was coming, no one really knew much about the game until it was dropped, which in and of itself gave a nostalgic feeling like the days of yesteryear. Like many, I rushed to download and dive into this refurbished Cyrodiil. Once getting there, everything felt both fresh and familiar. The changes to character customization were amazing. The new combat feel and new age lighting gave it such a nice modern aesthetic. Slaying the hordes of Mythic Dawn in the Imperial sewers and the assassination of the Emperor all filled me with the drug of nostalgic hope. But unlike the original, I walked out of the Imperial sewers for the first time, and instead of a sense of wonder, I felt disappointed. As a PC gamer, I pride myself on having a pretty solid setup, and would have thought that playing a remaster of a game from almost 20 years ago would have been a cakewalk. I was dead wrong. Walking out into the lands of Cyrodiil for the first time in Oblivion Remastered, I would have thought that I was playing on a potato. Frames dropped into the 20s, and I experienced ridiculous stutters that consistently worsened as I played. To top it off, there were still quest-breaking bugs and even new bugs that were introduced just in the remaster. I figured that we would at least get a day 1 patch that would fix these issues. However, 4 days after launch, we did get an update from the team, but all it said was, "Thank you to over 4 million players." No mention of an upcoming update, a fix, or nothing. Instead of discussion boards cheering, it was filled with players begging Bethesda to fix the game. Players were frustrated, and understandably so. A game that was so aesthetically pleasing to play back in the day was remastered to an almost unplayable point. I thought to myself, they know the issues, they'll probably just fix it in the upcoming week. Fast forward a month and a half later to June 4th, and players finally received an update from the team, saying, "Thanks for all your excitement and feedback since the launch of The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered. We are working on 2 separate updates to be launched in the coming weeks. The first update will be focused on quests, major bugs and blockers, and quality of life fixes. Our second update will focus on performance, and we will share more details when we are able." Honestly, the first update was nice for players, and fixed tons of bugs, crashes, and more that were game-breaking issues. However, there was still nothing at this point for the terrible performance that many players faced. It wouldn't be until July 9th, 2.5 months later that we would finally receive an update to help the performance of the game, which many players still have issues with today. While a 19-year-old game receiving a remaster that can barely run on high-end PCs is a problem, the even bigger issue was receiving no communication from the team. Similar to the rest of the community, I felt disrespected. It felt as though Bethesda was dishonoring the legacy of the original Oblivion by even releasing the game in this state. And what made things even worse was that the nostalgic glee that I had felt was quickly replaced by feeling swindled by just another modern-day game released in a broken state. Usually during 6 months later, we take some time to discuss the future of the game, but with Oblivion Remastered, there really isn't a future planned. As it sits today, the final update we received was the July 9th update, which was received with relatively mixed results. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered was already released with all of the DLC from the original game, so there really isn't much in terms of new and upcoming content for players to look forward to. Currently, there is no official mod support for the game, so that could be a way for Bethesda to recoup some of the fanbase. However, as of now, there has been nothing mentioned for this being in the works or even on the radar. This is probably because the game uses Unreal Engine instead of the original engine, but with what we have seen so far when it comes to Oblivion Remastered, we probably won't hear anything about mod support previous to some sort of shadow drop. So with nothing to really look forward to unless you're getting excited for Sky Oblivion, I think it is worth discussing expectations for a nostalgic experience in current gaming. As I said, I was fully on the bandwagon for the game, and with everything we have discussed up to this point, you would think that I am a pretty big hater. However, I fall more into the mixed category when it comes to Oblivion Remastered. In terms of scope, I think what they tried to do with the remaster was actually pretty amazing. Instead of just giving us some HD textures and plopping it onto some modern platforms, they essentially recreated the game on a new engine, with new lighting, animations, and a lot more, and I do give them props for that. To me, it did actually feel like a new experience, and I loved it. After coming back to the game after all of the fixes, I was in the section of players where the update did in fact fix a lot of issues, and it did recapture some of the beauty from the original game. However, it was some of the other things that were done that put a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Bethesda clearly made a lot of money on this game, and knew they had a community for it, but at the same time barely relayed any information to fans who were ecstatic about their game and were still having issues. They had the money and the resources in the modern day to communicate with their fan base, but just decided not to, which feels just wrong to me. And I'm assuming that many others feel similarly. With modern gaming, we expect to have these answers ASAP because we have a direct line to the developers. However, maybe it's our nostalgia that made us not consider the possibility that gaming has just changed. Back in the day, there was no way that this game could have been released in the state that it was because they had to make it near perfect. However, we have seen time and time again that games today are released without being finished. Is it our fault that we assume that this couldn't happen with the remaster of a classic like Oblivion? Well, I'm not sure, but one thing that is certain is that gaming has changed. Developers have changed, and even the gaming community has changed. After the countless times new releases have let down massive portions of its communities in the new era of gaming, it is easy to get excited about something nostalgic like a remaster of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. However, something that should have been a hit somehow fumbled at launch and failed to pick up the ball for months. All of the built-up nostalgia, all of the hope, and all of the waiting for what should have been the greatest remaster of all time just kind of turned into something that we left behind as another AAA unpolished project rushed out the door. So was Oblivion Remastered worth it? Was it worth us thinking it could recapture the feelings that we had for the original? Was it worth the hype surrounding its shadow drop? Was it worth us getting this game in its launch state, and is it even worth it today? Well, my answer to all of those questions would have to be a big, whopping no. But let us know what you think. And thank you for watching Game Rant. Be sure to check out GameRant.com for everything gaming, and lastly, don't forget to game on, and we'll see you next time.